it looks like we've got plenty of people in here ready to go, so I'll go ahead and get this started. So just a little introduction, some housekeeping, and then we'll just kind of dive into. We're going to try to cover simple asset spawning and world streaming today. There's a lot to be said about both of these features that I don't quite cover in the challenge. If anyone has any questions, we can certainly go over it, but for the most part, we're going to keep it pretty simple today. But like I said, I don't mind to answer any questions that might step outside of the challenges. That's fine as well. We're going to record today's session. I'm going to set everyone to mute because we are recording. If you want to come on mic, raise your hand. I think there's a way I can see if hands are raised. But ultimately, I encourage you to just type your question out in chat, and I'll be sure to address them all there. That's pretty much it. Don't forget there'll be a feedback survey at the end of today's session, and I will share that link in chat whenever that time comes. I want to share with you guys, if you haven't seen it already, the links for today or this week's challenges for the simple asset spawning and the world streaming. Let me pull those up. So this would be the simple asset spawning link. This is going to be our world streaming link. So if you haven't completed those, hopefully after today, you'll have the confidence to knock both of those out and get your badges. All right, so let's start with the simple asset spawning. And actually, before we go, let me address the question that we have in chat from Natalie here. They say, what is the most efficient way to spawn enemies? I understand there are 3 ways to spawn, which is the best, or maybe there are other ways. Object spawning, object pooling, and spawn controller. For example, creating a swarm of small enemies that have to follow and attack the player. Well, the pooling, of course, object spawning that's just basically what we're going to talk about today. Just simple asset spawning one object at a time. And you can certainly do that. Object pooling, if there's a large number of enemies, and maybe the enemies are going to be destroyed and repeatedly spawning, the pooling might be the way to go. Now, you can do pooling with the spawn controller, and ultimately the spawn controller might be the best way to go. Essentially, it'll allow you to load the assets like preemptively. So maybe you keep a pool. Maybe let's say, for example, you've got 30 small enemies, and maybe you got 30 of them at a time, right? That seems like it might be a lot, but we'll go with it. And so your 30 will be in the world, and then maybe you load up like 10 of them as a way that they're either hidden or you just load them with the spawn controller. And so that way, when one of your 30 dies, you can pick from one of your 10, and then they'll actually load into the world faster and much more efficient that way. So you always kind of keep a pool. So maybe if your pool gets down to 5, you load in 5 more to replenish your pool. So you've always at least got a handful that are ready to go. If I had to answer, I would probably say a combination of 2 and 3, object pooling and your spawn controller. Now, a lot of that logic you'll kind of have to write yourself as far as the pooling goes. But it's really situational. It just depends on your use case and what you need. But ideally, if there's a lot of them, you want to have some ready to go whenever a few of them die. So let's take a look at the asset spawning. Now, in our challenge, we talk about how to first create your asset, and I can pretty much show this live. You guys would probably rather prefer to see that anyway. In the tutorial, I created just a simple object We can grab some shapes from our build menu. I think in the tutorial I grabbed a cube. And the easiest way to create an asset is to simply select it, right click it, and go to create asset here. Now, if you have multiple objects, let's say we duplicate the cube, you can select them both. So like holding, I think it's holding shift, you can highlight them both. You can right click and create an asset out of just the two together. Now, if you do that, one of these is still considered the root entity, the main entity, and the other is considered a child once they're spawned in. So, and typically in the past, it's been whatever asset you selected first would be the root, and then any of the secondary ones that you select would be the child or a child of the root. I think anymore you get when you try to retrieve through scripts, when you try to retrieve a list of the entities, you actually just get an array of all the entities, and they're typically arrayed in the order in which you selected them. So the first one's like in index 0, the second one's in index 1, and so on. We could also parent these. Now, if we parent them, we want to make sure if we select any object in the group, it looks like it immediately just selected that cube. And if I was to right click this, it would just create an asset out of that cube. But if I wanted to create an asset out of the group or the parent, I would want to make sure I've got the parent object selected so that they're both selected, and then I can right click and create the asset that way. So pretty straightforward little interface here for creating your assets. Of course, you want to give it a name that makes sense to you. Descriptions are optional, although if you've got one, why not throw it in there? And then you need to select a folder. Now, I don't think, yeah, we don't have the ability to create a new folder here. So if you find that like you don't have the folder you want to create your asset in, you're going to have to hit cancel, come back, do a new folder, and then you can create the folder, and then that folder will show up in the list whenever you go to save the asset. So let's give this a name. Generic name, generic description. We'll select a folder. I'm just going to drop it in my main assets folder. Everyone has this folder here, my assets. So we'll go ahead and just hit create. And it's done. If we get this out of our way, we'll see that our asset's now here. And so if I drag this out into the world, we're basically going to see the exact same thing that we just saved with our two cubes inside. It did change, interesting, it did end up updating the name, so that's something to note. Previously, it was just called empty entity, and when I saved it as an asset, both of them got named to generic name. So that's pretty cool. But now we want to, I think I did that. Did I do? I think I might have put in camel case. I don't know if that was default. I have a habit of doing camel case, so it's likely it's a good likelihood that that's just what I did. But so now we've got our asset created, and we want to spawn it in our world. And obviously, there's multiple ways or reasons that you could spawn an asset into your world. You could spawn it pretty much on any event that you're able to detect. On player enter, you could spawn it at world start. In the challenge, though, I decided to spawn it as gets to be habit, yeah. I just spawn it using trigger enter. So that's kind of what we'll show here real quick. So I actually don't have it set up by default, which is fine. And I'm going to go ahead and clean up my space here by deleting my asset. I'm going to go ahead and try to select these and sort of move them out of my way because I want to drop a trigger right here in front of my spawn gizmo. So we'll go to build gizmos. We'll grab us a trigger. He's below the floor, so let's pull him up a little bit. And that should be good enough for me to walk into when I spawn. Now, let's talk about the script for spawning, because that's the next part, right? We don't have to change any of the behaviors of our script in this case, because I want it to just react to a player entering the spawn, or I'm sorry, the trigger zone. Now, I have a trigger or a script created already for us called simple spawning, so I'm going to select that one. But let's actually pop over to VS Code and let's take a look at what's going on in that script, kind of break it down. And I hope everyone can see this pretty well. I'm going to zoom in here quite a bit, so it should be large enough for everyone to see. By default, when we create a script, it automatically imports the Horizon package as a whole for us, and that's fine. We'll use that. This will be the name of our script. In this case, we're not going to have any props definitions, so this is just going to be left blank. Now, there are several ways you can create a reference to the asset you want to spawn. I could have done it as a constant up here and did something like that instead, so it's outside of the class. You could create an entirely different file. If there's a lot of assets in your world, maybe you want to keep them all in one place. You could create them in a separate file and do an export const like that. And so you would have to then import like this name from whatever the name of the package is, or the name of the file is that you would be importing from. But I chose to keep it pretty simple for our challenge, and I just created a private variable. It's just anywhere inside of the class, pretty much. I typically drop my private variables right below my props definitions. But we're going to cast this as an asset type, and then we're going to initialize it by setting it equal to a new asset. And in order to reference assets by their ID, yep, I'll show you where you get this in just a moment. So in order to access it, we'll use this syntax. We'll cast the ID as a big int. And I recommend wrapping all of your asset IDs in a string, either single or double. I think double's fine as well. Reason being, you can do it as a number, but you'll find that some of them actually get kind of big, too big for an int. So it's safest if we just wrap them in a string like this. And that's pretty much it for referencing our asset. Now we can basically use this anywhere inside of our class that we want to spawn. But let's take a look at where we get the ID, right? So if I select the asset from my asset library down at the bottom of my desktop editor, I'm actually going to see my asset ID right here. And so we've got 392 ending in 810. We can hit this copy button and it'll copy it right to our clipboard, come back to VS Code. And this is the asset ID for my old number, or the one I used in the challenge. So I can replace that with the one I just created. Now there are some optional parameters for creating an asset. You can define a version ID. I didn't do it in the challenge, but if you have a version ID, you could do you can do a comma here and then another big int in order to reference a version ID. So each time you update an asset, and we'll talk about updating it here in just a moment, But each time you do that, a new version ID is created. And so if you want to go back and spawn an old version, you can reference that ID here, just like I referenced the asset as a big int, and you can spawn old versions of your asset. If you don't reference anything, it'll just spawn the latest version. So it defaults to the whatever's current. If we pull up, I'm gonna grab the original asset that I created here because I do have some versions of that. And if we click version history, this is what we see. I believe if we view details on any of the previous versions, I would expect it to have gotten the asset ID or the version ID here. It's interesting that I didn't. Let me check the website real quick. I just want to see if they're possibly listed there as well. Just a second. This is outside of the scope of the challenge, but I just want to touch on it real quick. It won't take but just a minute. If it's here, I'll show you. If not, then we'll leave it as a mystery for now. Actually, there's probably someone in chat that knows. So you can pull up your assets in the Horizon portal if you didn't know. Let's check out this one. So here's the current version ID. Oh, up here at the top. So yeah, there's 3 versions. If I go to version 2, I get a different ID. If I go to version 1, even yet a different ID. So it looks like the IDs are found through the web portal. So you hit the drop down up top, select the version that you want, and you can copy and paste this as a big int and spawn an older version instead. Let's see, we got a question in chat. Since you are there, could you show how we can share assets between co-editors? Should be able to. It's been a while since I've done it. Let's take a look. So I think it requires a folder. Yeah. So I don't think you can share any of the assets that are here in the root folder. I'm not really seeing any options for sharing those. But if you create a folder, I can share this folder. I can type in the name of a creator and basically select that creator, hit done. Now they should be able to find it in their asset library as well. So yeah, it's based on folders. You have to have a folder in order to do that. All right, let's see what's next. So we talked about how to get the asset ID, how to get the version ID. Let's move on in our code here. Actually, I changed my mind. Before we move on, I want to talk about actually editing that asset, right? So there's actually a couple of ways. In the challenge, I only showed one way to keep it simple. There's more than one way to do it. In the challenge, I told you to right-click the asset and select Edit Template Definition. And you can totally do this. So it brings you into like this isolated view of your asset. And I'm able to basically select any cube, make any changes that I want. So let's set the color on these, right? Let's make just a random color. Got to change the strength of my color before I can actually change the tint. And so now we've got 2 new colors. I could also come in here and attach a script if I wanted to. You can pretty much you can do everything I think you can do in regular build mode. If I wanted to add an object to the view, I can literally just drag and drop a new object here, and now that's a part as well. Let's go ahead and give this one a different color. So now we've got a new object and new colors. Right? And then we just hit save. So you do have the option of describing your change. And this is mostly, of course, it could be for you. You know, maybe you're going back through your version history and you want to find a specific one It would be neat if you had the habit of describing each change so you knew which one was which. But also for other users that might be using your assets in their world, um, when you publish, they're going to have the option of accepting that update. And I think we may be able to show what that looks like. I'm going to go ahead and save and publish this change. And if there was a copy of that asset already in my world, I would see a blue dot up here. And if I click on that, I would see all of the updates for the assets that are in my world. And I have the option to decide whether or not to apply them to my world. Got a couple of questions in chat. Let's see what they are here. With the fallback system, those changes will affect every asset spawned from that template, even in other worlds. I apologize. I don't want to lead you wrong when it comes to FBS, so I'm going to avoid the question because it's not clear to me off the top of my head what the behavior is. If someone else in chat, if it is clear, you're welcome to answer the question, but without doing some research for myself, I'd be afraid to steer you in the wrong direction when it comes to FBS. Next question is there any way to download the script from some of the templates that are available in the Gizmo in headset, like droppable vehicle, for instance? Or are they only available to code blocks in headset when selecting that Gizmo? Is there a way to download the scripts from some of the templates? Are you talking about like the stuff from the tutorial world or stuff from the public assets from tutorial worlds? You should have access to, in the tutorial world, you should have access to all of the scripts. They are only shown when working in headset. So if the tutorial world has scripts based in code blocks, you won't be able to see or read code blocks currently through the desktop editor. So you are right. You would only be able to see those scripts in headset. If they're TypeScript scripts, you should be able, well, you really don't have much access to them in headset. You could see the scripts, I think, but you can't edit them. But you can definitely do that through the desktop editor, of course. Actually, if you want to, there is a way to download code block scripts using a third-party tool created by Wafflecopters. His website is horizonhub.info. If you want to explore over there and take a look at that, he's got a little tutorial. There's a little tutorial for doing that. Greg says, I would think if you are spawning the asset and using the version number as well, then it wouldn't matter about updates. Yeah, as you are specifying the version and then you update it, it wouldn't affect your world as the specified version. If you want the latest version, you would leave off the version number. Yeah, I would think that's true as well. And Josh has the link to the Horizon Hub. So there is a way, if you explore that website, there's a way to download code block scripts to that website so you could kind of read them offline or outside of headset. But that's third party. That's not official Meta supported or anything like that. So let's move on here because I want to make sure we get plenty of time to address world streaming as well. I think that's new. I don't know how the vertex count. Someone mentioned it in chat. I don't know how accurate it is, but what do I even have selected? That sphere? Do I have well, we could test it, but I don't want to get off track. All right, because I do want to make sure we have plenty of time for the world streaming as well. So let's go back to our script. Now that we've edited our asset, I did tell you there was two ways to edit assets. So if I bring out, we did right click and edit template asset, right? But we could also bring our asset into the world. Now, when it's blue over here in our hierarchy, that's kind of a cue to us to let us know that it's linked, which in this case, it's linked to one of our template assets. Now, I could change the color again. And as soon as I make a change, I get this, and I select the parent. I get this box up here in the property panel. If we click on it, it actually gives us kind of a history of the changes that have been made. And I can apply these changes to my asset from here just by clicking apply. Now we save and publish, and we'll find if we drag out another copy of the asset, it also has our changes, right? But now that we have a copy in the world, I just want to see the behavior even for myself real quick. So let's make another change by just changing the color again. Let's save that. Let's save and publish it. It immediately applied it to my world. It may have been because I hit the publish. Generally, get out of my way. You would if it okay. Well, this is what, and it went away. So I didn't even touch anything. It popped up briefly, went away. It updated to my world automatically. It looks like. Ideally, other users would have the option to apply that. And I do know, like if I was to bring in a 3D model and then I was to update that 3D model, it doesn't update them immediately in my world. I do get the option to apply those updates to any existing assets. I have tested that recently. Let's move on. Now that we've made our edit, we'll go ahead and get rid of the copy that we have. Let's go back to our script. Now, it's probably good to have it to add a pre-start to your script. They don't come by default, but basically pre-start will run before any script's start method runs. And so that allows us to make sure we're connected to any events that we want to hear or that we want to react to before any of those events have a chance to get sent, which is good. So I always make a habit of connecting to my events in pre-start, and you probably should as well. So we're just going to connect. Since this script is going to be running on a trigger gizmo, the only thing we really need to listen for is on player enters trigger. And that's all you see me doing here. I'm connecting to ourself. I'm listening for the on player enters trigger event. And then I'm redirecting it to using an arrow function to a method that I've created down below. And made sure I passed our player, because if you know anything about triggers, when they get entered, they give you a reference to the player or object that entered them. And so I want to make sure I pass that into my arrow function so I can also pass it into my private method, right? And so that's what we're doing here. We're not doing anything at start, although we have to have start. So we're going to leave it here, but it's not doing anything. And we'll come down and take a look. So when a player enters our trigger, it in turn fires our private method that we created here. And my private method is accepting a parameter, which is the parameter that I'm sending. Now this don't have to be entered by, it could literally be anything, as long as the type matches, and the type is a player, because the type that we sent is player as well. That's fine. The names don't have to match, just the type does. And then this is the most basic method for spawning an asset in your world. It's like I said, it's super simple. There's no bells or whistles on it. It just brings the asset into your world, and that's it. Now, when we spawn an asset, we have to reach into the world property of our component, and then we'll be able to access spawn asset. You'll also see in the world property, there's also delete asset. There's a bunch of other things in here as well but when it comes to spawning, it's just spawn asset and delete asset. So both of those are nested here in world. But spawn asset does have some parameters that it wants, and a few of them are actually optional. So it wants an asset, the asset to spawn. It wants a position to spawn it in. And then the rest of it is optional. And we know it's optional because of the question mark. Anytime we see that question mark, it lets us know that these are optional parameters. So we can exclude them, and they'll use default values. But I did specify them here. So we'll see the properties that I filled out. So here's a reference to our asset from up here, a reference to the private variable that we created to hold our asset. And so I just referenced it by saying this and the name. The next parameter we said was the position. So positions are determined in vectors. And I just gave it a 0, 0, 0. So if you see vec3.0, it's the same thing as 0, 0, 0. So essentially that means it'll spawn at the center of my world. And I could change this to another vector. I would have to cast a new vector. And that's the same thing as what we just saw. That's still a 0, 0, 0 vector. But now I could adjust it and bring it up 1 meter on the y-axis, right? The rotation was the next parameter. Again, I just used a 0 rotation. It's the same thing as a 0, 0, 0. And then the scale, I didn't want a 0 scale, so I actually used a vec3 1, which is the same thing as a 1, 1, 1. So it's just kind of shorthand as opposed to, this, right? Spelling it out. Pat says, could you change this vector to position of an object already in the world? You absolutely could. You would need a reference to that object, right? So you might drop a reference to some object under your props definitions and just give it an entity type. So now when I save this script and I go back to the world, I can now reference an object in my property panels. And so if I was to pick anything, an empty object is fine. Maybe I'll rename it and just call it objref for object reference. Now when I select my trigger, I can filter down by name that particular object. If I wanted to spawn at the position of that object, actually, before I can reference this object, I have to make sure it exists. TypeScript does not like referencing an entity without first confirming that that entity actually has a value. So the easy way to do that is to kind of wrap it in an if statement. And I'll just wrap everything in an if statement here. So I got to make sure some object exists by sticking it in an if statement before I decide to reference it. And so we'll replace our position with this dot props dot some object dot position dot get. So we get the position of our object and we use that as the vector for our spawning instead. Real quick shortcut. If you're in VS Code and you hold Shift Alt F, see how it did the spacing and it did the tab for me? It just cleans your code up. Shift Alt F and Control S are my two favorite hotkeys. I use them more than anything. What if you wanted to set the scale but not rotation? That's actually a good question that I don't immediately have the answer to. There's probably a simple answer for that. So if I was to delete my rotation, well, now there's a problem because it thinks that it's a type mismatch, right? But what if I was to maybe put another comma here? That don't work either. So that's actually a good question, and I don't immediately have the answer to that one. I apologize. Let me correct my code here. So, but we do have it set up. I don't know. Can you put null? I don't think so. Yeah, I have to research that one. I don't know off the top of my head. So this should be everything that we need. A couple more things I want to mention. You can get a reference to the object. that spawned, it'll give you, well, there's some, I'm not going to worry about correcting the errors here. Actually, it might be, which one does it want? I don't know. It's all right. It will give you an array of entities. And then, so like I said, your root entity will be 0 in that array, and then your children will be in the same order you selected them. So you could use this dot then to also get a reference. We don't talk about this in the challenge, so I won't go into too in depth here. But that would, if you were using simple spawning, that would be how you would get it this way. If you're using the spawn controller, which is, yeah, exactly, that's how you would destroy it. If you were using a spawn controller, you actually would get the objects in a different way. But we don't talk about that in the challenge, so we'll move on. Like I said, I still want to address world streaming as well. So back to our world, I think we're ready to go. We should see our asset spawn, thanks to Pat's suggestion, at the reference point that we've created. So let's go ahead and see what happens. I'm going to start the world, and I want to spawn myself in. If I take a few steps forward, boom, there it is. And it's up, and it's in the position of our reference object, which I highly recommend unless you have a reason not to use one, simply because I don't have to go in my script and make any changes to the position. I can now just move this. I did notice that it actually spawned, if we drag this back out, the pivot point ends up being the first object that I selected. And that also meant that is the reference point that it used to match the position of my reference object. If you wanted to change that position, you probably wouldn't want to set it up this way. You probably want to set it up with an empty object. And then you could change the position of the empty object and then reparent everything back to that object. And then the empty object would be the pivot point. But since I didn't have an empty object and I selected a cube, it created, I think it used that cube. Yeah, I don't have an, oh wait, I do have the empty object. But if I try to move it while it's in the group, it just moves my whole group. And if I try to break this apart, it'll separate it from my assets. But I could actually, if I do an edit, I can unparent this. I think that's behaving strangely. My hierarchy is not showing my cubes. It's weird. But so like if I move this and then how do I reparent everything back if it's not gonna, if I wasn't in this mode, or if my cubes were showing up in my hierarchy, I could very easily just grab my cubes and drop them back inside this group. Anyway, we're not going to dwell on it. But yeah, that's a good thing to know. The pivot point will be the position that it matches for your reference object. So let's move on. We've got about 15, 20 minutes left, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time to address worlds streaming. I think it's pretty exciting. I've already got us set up here. Let me kind of move these objects out of our way and move these back in front, oops, of our reference point, or our spawn point, my bad. Now, in order to create an asset for your world streaming, it actually requires a world in and of itself. So if we leave this world and we go back, we need to take a look at some of the worlds I already created. I created a sublevel example 0, and example 1, and example 2, because I have 3 sublevels that I'm using in the world streaming feature, right? So let's just take a look at one of these real quick. So to create a sublevel, you start a new world, and this world is only going to it's only going to contain just the level that you want to spawn. And so this is it. It just contains my asset. And I parented it just to keep everything neat and clean. And you can see my empty object is, and of course, that also means my pivot point is the first square or the first block of my walkway here. You have to bring in a sublevel gizmo from the build menu. You just click sublevel. And for some reason, my sublevels look like TypeScript gizmos. They're not supposed to look like that. They're supposed to be blue with like, I think, a cloud on them or something. I don't know why mine look different, but whatever. So ignore that fact. But this is a sublevel gizmo. And if you select it, we have some sublevel settings. Actually, we just have one setting, right? The type. By default, it's deep link. But for this world, we don't want deep link. Deep link is what allows us to select the sublevels that we want to spawn in our main world. But we actually want to select and exclude for now. And what that exclude means is my sublevels here in my hierarchy. And I want this to spawn, obviously, but I don't want a spawn point to spawn in my world. And maybe there's other objects here as well that I want to exclude from spawning in my main world. So we actually nest or parent those underneath our sublevel. So anything that is a child of our sublevel will not be included when and it'll spawn everything else in the world, right? Except for what's nested underneath the sublevel. So be sure to include it at the very minimum, the spawn point. You can just simply drag and drop it on top of the sublevel, and that'll nest it underneath the sublevel. Why do I have two? I don't need two. It's going to delete. Well, actually, I'm going to drag and drop this one under here and delete the one that's got the generic name. Anyway. So that's the basics of it, right? Once you've got your asset created, you've got anything that you want to exclude nested under your sublevel, and you've selected sublevel in your dropdown. Now you need to publish this world. So you just go to publish world. You still need to satisfy your world ratings, your comfort rating, your tags. Make sure the visibility is turned off so that it's not visible to the public, and then just hit publish. I was curious why you used the worlds though. Yeah, I think it's required, right? When would you use spawn controller instead of world.spawn asset? That's a personal preference. I could have used it for the challenge, and I could have used it in the same way. It's just a different way. It's basically a built-in controller essentially for spawning. So they attempt to make your life a little easier just by providing that option to you. Because it does come with some added benefits of like being able to load the asset before you make it active. So if that like appeals to you, then go for a spawn controller instead of just the generic way, right? Tuna says, sorry, 3 different worlds for each spawn when exclude and include work fine. So I wanted, I could have used this one 3 different times. I could have spawned this walkway 3 times, right? But I actually wanted my walkways to look different. So if we go to one of the other worlds, we're going to see that the walkways are actually a different color. So I have a green one, I have a red one, and I have a yellow one. And so that's why I created 3 different worlds. just to simulate having three different assets or three different maps to load in, essentially. So same thing here, right? Exact same walkway, and we've got our spawn point nested under our sublevel, so it's excluded, right? That was the only reason. It's just to kind of show that how to do different levels. But you could absolutely use the same one. I could have used the same one repeatedly, and it would have worked just the same. So let's go back to our main world. Now, the first thing we do is we drag out the sublevel gizmo. My weird looking sublevel gizmo. And I drug out 3 of them because I had 3 walkways I wanted to spawn. But now we'll choose deep link in the properties, which is chosen by default. We get to choose an initial state that the level is loaded in. And then we need to pick the level, right? So this will show all of my published worlds, and I can select the one that matches the map that I intend to spawn at the location of this sublevel gizmo. So if you remember when we were looking at my sublevel, and I parented it, the empty object I parented it to was essentially setting right here. And so I did that specifically because when it spawns in my sublevel, that pivot point or that empty object or the position of that parent, however you want to describe it, is going to spawn in the position, it's going to match the position of the sublevel. So I can actually use that to my advantage. And I can bring in my 3 sublevels. I can set each one of them to active. And I can see all of them in real time. And so that allows me to position them, right? So I can set their position. And then when I'm done, I'll make sure to come back and choose the initial state that I want the levels to essentially spawn in when the world starts. For this third walkway, I decided to just leave it unloaded. So it's not active, it's not loaded, it's using no resources in my world when it starts. For the second one, I chose to actually go ahead and load it. So I chose loaded in the initial state. Loaded means it's here, and we can see it's here if we look in the hierarchy. I have Red Brick Road under the sublevel for Red Brick Road. I have my Red Brick Road in my hierarchy. If I was to select this and change it to unloaded, well, then you're going to see the Red Brick Road disappeared from underneath my sublevel. But if it's loaded, it's here, but it's like missing, right? It's kind of basically not visible. And then for my first walkway, I just I set it to active. So it's always here when I load into the world. The icon, the gizmo does? Okay. At least I'm not alone. So now that we've got the sublevels set up, we've got them positioned where we want them, and we've got their initial states set where we want. I brought in, for the purpose of the challenge, I just brought in 2 triggers, and I placed them above each of my sublevels. And so they're actually running a script that I've already created. So let's take a look at that script. Called it subleveling. Now, in order to utilize world streaming, of course, we're always going to import the core, but we do have to import the world streaming API. And before you can import it, you need to enable it under your APIs, right? So right here, just make sure this is toggled on. And when you toggle it on, now you can import world streaming. And that allows us to access things like a sublevel entity, for example, which I think is really the only component or part of the library that I do access. I did set a couple of properties, the next sublevel and the previous sublevel, because when I walk it, now this script's going to be running on each trigger. And so each trigger has a reference to the world that's next and the world that was previously before me or before this one. And I kept it simple. And so when you create your worlds, maybe your logic will be a little more complex than this. I just wanted to show you the basics here. So we have a reference to entities. The entity is going to essentially be the sublevel for the next map and the previous map. Again, like before, we have our pre-start. We're connecting to a code block event for our trigger for the player to enter. We're going to pass that player, and we're going to fire a method that we created down below, just like in our previous script. Nothing in the start method. But let's take a look at our actual method that we did create. I didn't actually use that player. So I think I could actually omit it altogether, right? Because I didn't end up using it, but whatever, it's there. Previously, in our previous, I just said previous twice. Ignore me. I was kind of lazy, and I said, we need to check to make sure that our property has value before we can use it. And we did it by wrapping it in an if statement. And I just wrapped like the whole reference to the props and everything here, right? I went a step further, and I do this in just about all the scripts that I write. And I just created a constant, like just a constant variable within my method. So it can only be referenced like within this space here, right? Within this method. It's a constant variable that I set to an entity, and I just set its value to whatever the value is of that property. And that essentially just basically keeps me from having to write this.props.previous sublevel every single time I want to reference it. And instead, I can just reference the constant variable I created, next sublevel or previous sublevel, right? And I do that pretty commonly. That's all I'm doing here again. Just makes things a little cleaner, I think. But you do see me basically check with an if statement if sublevel has a value, and I also check to see if previous sublevel has a value. Now, I did this very specifically because if we go back to the world and we look, not every sublevel has a previous, or not every gizmo has a previous sublevel. So this one was my first sublevel, so I don't have a previous one, so I left it blank intentionally. And the next one, actually, it had both. And then maybe if there was, in the last one, if I had a trigger for it too, there wouldn't be a next sublevel. It would be the last one. And so that helps my code to determine first, do we even have a next sublevel or a previous sublevel to spawn? And if we do, then go ahead and do the thing. If we don't, well, then don't do the thing and just skip it and go on about your business. This script, to answer your question, could we get the code to play with? It's actually included in the challenge steps. So for this one, at the bottom of the script, I've got the entire script listed there as well. So download the challenge scripts and you can already have access to the same thing we're looking at now. So we reference our sublevel entity. We have to cast it as a sublevel entity. I did so by just reaching inside of my world streaming API, the world streaming library, and I was able to have access to a sublevel entity. So I just casted my regular entity as a sublevel entity. And then that gives me access to all of the sublevel entity properties and methods. Activates one of them. If we look, we can check the current state of a sublevel. We can hide the sublevel. There's also the ability to load and unload as well, and others, right? But that's essentially all we're doing here. If it's the next sublevel, we're going to activate it. And so activate, if we look, it both loads and sets it to visible. I could have preemptively loaded it and then set it to activate at a later date. But I chose just to keep it simple here and just activate it right out the gate. And then I think hide essentially despawns it and then preloads it so it can be activated again later, as opposed to just straight up unloading it altogether. So again, there's different ways to write this, and depending on what you're doing, it might make sense to hide it, which in the background, like I said, unloads it and then reloads it. But then maybe you just want to unload it altogether. Maybe you have no intention of bringing it back, so it doesn't need to be reloaded again. So let's take a look at it in action here since we are at time. So I walk into the first trigger, the second sublevel loads. I walk into the second trigger. The first one, it was hid and then reloaded. So it could be spawned again, but I don't have logic to bring it back. Your world probably should if it needs it, right? And then nothing happens when I walk on top of this one because I didn't have a trigger. So that's pretty much it. So that's a walkthrough of this week's challenges for asset spawning and world streaming. I know we're at hour, but if anyone has any questions and they you want to drop them in chat real quick, I'll hang out for a little bit and answer any of them. Could you post the changes to the script to have the asset spawn on a reference object? I definitely could. I think I'll tag you. I think I'll drop it in this post here for the simple asset spawning, and I'll tag you specifically. So if you want to check it out there, I'll try to remember to do that. If I don't, just tag me on Discord or something and remind me. I don't mind to do it. And you're very welcome. See, I've never heard of these challenges. Where can I find it? If you've never heard of them, you want to sign up for the creator forum. And this is the URL. Let me grab this for you. Oops, I hit a button. Fat fingered a button. So this is a link to the forums overall. So when you arrive there and sign up, you'll have access to the VR forums, developer forums. But where we are specifically for Horizon World creators is in the creator forum. And if you scroll down, all of the competitions are listed under events or challenges, I'm sorry. They're listed under events and competitions. And the current ones will be tagged or pinned at the top. But if you go through and scroll down, you're going to find 4, 3, 2, and 1 for the previous weeks as well. How does world streaming affect capacity? It affects capacity in the same way. It does, essentially, in the same way any of your other objects would. It's just that when you unload a sublevel, you get to recover that capacity back. When you load it, you're eating up that capacity. But yeah, the magic is in the ability to then unload it and recover that capacity. So you could load something else in exchange. So that's the main reason why you might want to either asset spawn or world stream. Mine says I already did. I was in one from Pigeon last week. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Cortiva, sorry. If you've already signed up, then you should be able to sign in and visit the forums. If you can't visit the forums or if you can't make posts and things like that, you might have to reach out in Zendesk. Are the recordings available through the creator forum? They're not in the forum. They should show up in the Learn Center under MHCP program. And it's one of these categories they're going to start appearing in. I don't think it's focus sessions. No. It may be Q&A sessions. One of these, it should start showing up under in this category here under MHCP programs. I don't know if they've gotten any of them uploaded yet, but they should start very soon. Are they sharing the same one? I think they are. The feedback link. Oh, that's a good point. I get what you're saying now, Grativa. I'll have to bring that up with somebody. Sorry about that. The implications for world streaming seem to be geared for a full. Well, I will say world streaming is different than asset spawning in that world streaming, everything has to be dynamic. Or I'm sorry, I said that backwards. Everything has to be static. So it has to be a static map. There can't be any dynamics in it. But yeah, it is um, kind of geared towards a large world, right? Your asset spawning, it can be static or dynamic. It doesn't matter. Josh says sometimes you just have to open in a new browser, clear the cookies. Oh, that might be a good point. Give that a shot. Says already completed for Evan too. Yeah, you may have to clear cookies, like Josh was saying. Maybe open it in incognito might help, or just copy the link and try it in a browser you don't use. The tutorial example uses one spawn controller per asset. Can one spawn controller be used to spawn many of the same asset? Would that be more performant? Gortiva got it, and our okay. Yeah, it looks like it worked for him. To answer the question, let me look real quick. I've got it pulled up here. Implementing the spawn controller. Yeah, it does look like a spawn controller per asset, because it only lets you reference one asset in the properties when you create a new controller. So yeah, it's essentially a controller for that specific asset. And it gives you options for preloading it, spawning it, unloading it, and then disposing of the controller altogether, which means you won't be able to bring it back. If you haven't looked at this document, it's a good document in reference to the simple asset spawning and the spawn controller. And also, there is a link, there's a section of the creator document that talks about spawning as well. So that's worth taking a look at if you're interested. There's some more details in here. So both of those are good resources. We were planning to use world streaming as an actual levels design for enemy waves, and you say there is no dynamic objects, right? No workarounds. No, so world streaming is specifically meant for just static spawning only. So it's essentially meant for just like spawning a house or a map. If you need dynamics, you're going to want to use asset spawning as opposed to world streaming for that. So your enemy waves, your enemies that are going to be attacking or moving down the map or whatnot, those need to be done with asset spawning instead of world streaming. I hope that helps answer your questions. I mean, you could certainly probably find a way around it, although it may not be performant. I don't know. I've often wondered how you would, and we can talk about it just a second. By the way, class is over, so if you got to go, you're good to go. But let's say, for example, you do spawn a map. You guys are very welcome. Thank you for coming.